The Charlotte Podcast Festival is presented by Blumenthal Performing Arts, the Queen City Podcast Network, Eclecs Creative Agency, and WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the home of acclaimed podcast Charlotte Talks, She Says, The List, Amplifier, Southbound, and FAQ City. Learn more about WFAE and our latest podcast, Work It, at WFAE.org.
Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to Charlotte Podcast Festival, presented by WFAE, Queen City Podcast Network, Blumenthal Performing Arts, and Eclecs. My name is Joe Hunsaker, event manager and comedy producer at Blumenthal Performing Arts. I'm also a podcaster. I do the In the Spotlight podcast with Blumenthal Performing Arts. I do an American Timelines, a true crime / pop culture podcast with my wife. And we're in the Queen City Podcast Network. And this month, I'm going to be unleashing a new podcast called Nerd School with a panel of nerds teaching me how to be a true nerd. So look for that coming soon. This session is called Fill Your Ears with Arts and Culture. We are going to focus on some local podcasts that can fill our ears with the arts, culture, and community that we're missing out since entertainment venues have been closed due to COVID-19. Joining us today are four awesome podcasters in arts and culture. Tamberly Ferguson, from WDAV's Power Play, a podcast that explores stories about the power of music, the music of the powerful, music as a means to power, and what happens when music and power go head to head. Also joining us will be Keith Cradle from Crafted with Cradle. That's a podcast and video simulcast that blends two incredible things together, conversation and cocktails. Each episode, Dr. Keith Cradle engages with some of Charlotte's finest residents to discuss popular issues over their favorite crafted cocktails. Also joining us will be Brian Lafontaine from You May Have Seen. Brian, a professional actor you may have seen on TV and movies, talks to and shares the stories of other lifelong career actors who aren't household names on You May Have Seen. And then rounding out the panel will be Jay Brown of Cheers Charlotte Radio, which is a bi-weekly podcast exploring the world of craft beer, home brew, great food, and good living in the Queen City. Cheers is recorded live and on site at local craft beer bars, breweries, and festivals. Folks, this is an hour-long session. The last 15 minutes or so will be Q&A. If you have questions as we go, feel free to type them right there into the chat, and I'll try to keep track of them, and I'll ask them at the end. This session will be recorded and made available as an archive session for those who registered. It'll be sent out later this month via email. Also, you'll be getting a short survey by email that'll be shared after the session is complete. So please fill that out. That helps us make this festival better and find out what you liked and what you didn't like. Also, be sure to check out the full list of sessions on the Charlotte Podcast Festival website, charlottepodcastfestival.com. Please share about this session on social media using the hashtag CLTPodcastFest. You can tag WFAE, Queen City Podcast Network, Blumenthal Performing Arts, and Eclecs. Go ahead and tag everybody. Get that social media buzz going. Let us all know how you did. Unless you don't like it, then don't tell anybody. Individuals can also purchase on the website this great Charlotte Podcast Festival t-shirt. Check it out. Cool, right? You jealous?
Yeah.
Yes, I knew you would be. You can get this at the website. They are cool. Get those out there and going. Now, let's go ahead and welcome our panelists. We're gonna go around the horn with our panelists, and they're gonna tell us a little bit about their podcast, how they got started, what their podcast is, and we'll go from there. We'll start out with Jay Brown, who was a producer of a sports talk show here in Charlotte for over 10 years. That led to hosting a radio-style beer podcast. After that, he started as a sales rep for a craft beer distributor. Now, he is the sales and marketing director for Artisan Beverage Group from Cheers Charlotte Radio. Jay Brown, tell us about your podcast.
Thank you, Joe. Make sure I'm on here. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for everybody for joining us too. This is great. So Cheers Charlotte is a craft beer podcast. We're about 80%. We talk about craft beer. We also add in art and music and wine and liquor, and we did a cigar episode. So we're not just craft beer, but for the most part we are. Started it back in 2013, so about 7 years. We got about 265 episodes, I think. They run about an hour or so. And the way Joe said it, it's a radio style podcast. So we take breaks in between. I was in radio for a while. So for me, it's more of like a 1 hour show of radio. So we do about 20 minutes. Then we take a break. We come back for about 10 minutes. We take another break. We do another 10 minutes, and then we're done. We don't do any editing or anything like that. We hit record and we go, and then we hit stop, and that's the segment. So we don't do a whole lot of editing. We don't take out any questions or anything like that if we think we screwed up. So to me, it's just like live radio. You hit record and you go. And we've been doing it, like I said, since 2013. Talked to just about all the breweries in Charlotte, a lot from across the state and then across the nation too. When COVID hit, we started using Zoom calls, which was kind of a way to keep it going. And it's been fun. I've met a lot of great people, get to do fun panels like this, and I appreciate everybody having me.
Yeah. Jay, I think my favorite thing you did was when a couple years ago when the Panthers had you went down the Panthers schedule and you contacted breweries from every city, the teams they were playing, and that was really cool to learn about other cities.
I can't take credit for that. One of my partners on the show, he came up with that idea, and we ran with it. We had them send us beer from the city, and then we figured out what the food was that was really popular in that city, and then we tried as best we could to get somebody in Charlotte that would also do that style of food, and we'd eat that food on the show, and then drink the beer from the city and talk with the brewery from the city. It was a lot of fun, a lot of organization, a lot of logistics, but we got it done.
That's good. Now, what made you start that podcast? Like, who came up with the idea?
It was kind of a joint between Caesar, one of my partners on there, and myself. I kind of wanted to do a podcast just because I do like radio and I like talking on microphones. So I wanted to do one. He was part of another podcast at the time. We met through Niels Weldy, who does the Queen City Brewers Festival. We were doing social media for him. And we just kind of got to talking about how we should do our own podcast. And within about 3 weeks of meeting Caesar, we were recording. And the first night that I met our third co-host, Ford, was the first night I met him, and then we recorded our first episode. And we all had really good chemistry, and we all kind of clicked. It worked out pretty well for us.
That's great. And you get to drink beers.
We get to drink beer, and wine and liquor, and smoke cigars. Yeah.
Yes, and that's culture, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And now let's move on let's welcome Brian Lafontaine, who has been working as a professional actor in film, TV, commercials, voiceover, and theater for almost 30 years. You may have seen him in The Hate You Give, Homeland, Stranger Things, Turn, Nashville, The Vampire Diaries, Dawson's Creek, and most recently on the hit Netflix show Ozark. You may have seen Brian Lafontaine.
Thanks, Joe. And I want to thank everybody for having me and allowing me and asking me to be a part of this. This is truly a lot of fun and a great honor. Yes, I am Brian Lafontaine, the host of You May Have Seen, where I interview other career, lifelong actors who you probably have never even heard of. But they're integral parts of a lot of the movies and stories and TV shows that you watch all the time, but you just don't think about. So and I'm really articulate, and I'm good with thoughts. I've been doing the podcast for about 2 years now, and since the pandemic hit, since COVID, I actually started moving things more into the issues and acknowledging that, and still talking to actors about it, and just kind of keeping us all together in this community and this experience as we're taking this ride together.
So Brian, where'd you get the idea to do this, to talk to other actors?
I was listening to other podcasts that inspired me. I was listening to Here's the Thing with Alec Baldwin. I was watching Comedians in Cars with Jerry Seinfeld. And I just kept hearing from all these celebrities, like what they had to say was so significant. And it just hit me. I was like, why is no one talking to us? So I wanted to give a platform to the actors and the performers out there who are just as committed, who are just as passionate, who in a lot of ways are just as talented, and won't quit this industry until someone puts them in the ground. And I wanted to show that their stories were just as interesting. The only difference between, for example, the guy that plays cop number 2 on an episode of Law and Order and George Clooney is that, George Clooney got the chance to become an A-list celebrity, and cop number 2, that didn't go his way. There's an awful lot of luck and timing and stars aligning up along with talent and all that stuff. And I just wanted to show that There's a lot of people out there, and everybody's got a story, and I think every single one of them is interesting and worth listening to.
Yeah, I think a lot of people be surprised to know that you can make a living as an actor. Like I mean, people think you have to either be George Clooney or that's it.
Yeah, or you're a waiter, right?
Oh yeah, and that there are people that live here in Charlotte that are on everything.
Yes.
I gotta say, I mean, I told you this before when we were planning this, but when I saw you on Ozark, I was like, I know that guy. I know that guy. I was like, I think I know him personally. That's so. I was like, who is that? Because you look different than you do now,
Right.
but and I'm sure you do every time. But that was my first time of recognizing you on TV without like going to look up what you were in.
Yeah, and I totally understand. Most people tune into movies and TV shows because of the stars, because of the celebrities. That's what draws them in, and that's why they get paid as much money as they do. But the rest of us who help fill out the rest of the story are part of some really significant moments in some of your favorite shows that you probably don't even stop to think about. Like, just for example, when I was on Nashville, sorry to spoiler alert for those of you who are just binge watching Nashville now and you haven't gotten this far along. I was the doctor that couldn't save Connie Britton's life. She was the star of the show. And, I was in the episode where she died. I was the doctor that couldn't save her.
Without you, she doesn't die.
Right. See, you're welcome. You're welcome.
You killed Connie Britton. Okay. Now please welcome, let's move on to Keith Cradle. He has a BA in communications from Johnson C. Smith University, a master's degree in health administration from UNC Charlotte, a dual master's of business administration, and a master's of science and leadership and organizational change from Pfeiffer University, a PhD in leadership and organizational change from Walden University. Can you have that many degrees? That should be illegal. He's on the board of directors for the Beckler Museum, the Charlotte Trail of History, the Mini Museums, Contemporary Collecting Group. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The Mint Museum's Contemporary Collecting Group, the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council, and currently the Director of Youth Juvenile Programs for the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office, and the host of the Crafting with Cradle podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Keith Cradle.
Yo, man, what's up? And you can have that many degrees if you want done with student debt. So,
Yeah, I hear you, man. That's great. That's amazing. I mean, I barely got a bachelor's degree, so you doing all that is absolutely amazing. Tell us about Crafting with Cradle. How did you come up with the idea? How did you just start it? What's it about?
So Crafting with Cradle, our tagline is curated conversations over cocktails with some of Charlotte art's finest. Try saying that 3 times in a row. And so essentially, we started the podcast, 2 good friends of mine who are the producers, Chuck Holliday and Jamaica Witten. We were talking about, a way to engage folk in Charlotte with our art and cultural scene, particularly because, again, I sit on a few boards involved in our community when it pertains to arts. And I was having all these great conversations with gallerists, artists, the CEOs who are running the big institutions. And I was like, well, why isn't everyone else being able to listen in on these same conversations that I get to have? So essentially the podcast became my way of bringing those conversations to everyone else. And what better way to do that over cocktails? Because usually those conversations were happening after 5 o'clock. And so we were having drinks and cocktails, and no better way to get information from folk when they're a little bit loose, a little bit slithered, having their favorite cocktail, and doing that within the breadth and scope of about an hour. So our podcast is about an hour. And so, we had this great opportunity really to showcase and give people an opportunity to get involved, particularly as a warm introduction. So if you hadn't been, let's say, to the Beckler or the Mints, here was a way to hear from people who are working at these spaces and giving you an introduction to it. And so particularly for minorities, we saw that where a lot of minorities in our community really weren't engaging some of the bigger spaces because they didn't feel comfortable. And we said, hey, here's a way to do that. Listen to this conversation, get to know these folks, and follow our podcast. And that way it kind of just trails and leads you into that. So we've been, pretty successful. Of course, with COVID, we normally did the podcast at my house. If anyone was looking, this is not my house, this is my office. I'm working today. And so, we do the podcast at my home. But of course, when COVID hit, we had to pivot like everyone else. And so we started doing live segments via Zoom, but also on IG Live, which really helped us out because, again, people were tuning in, people were home. and they still needed to talk about the art in our community because artists, it was a job for them, and we wanted to make sure that people were supporting them.
Yeah, and that's just it with this pandemic. Everybody's missing out on everything. Our regular arts are the things we need, and you're really providing that to people. I really like the fact that I've always felt like I really want to be connected in Charlotte with everybody. Like I want to know everybody and all the everywhere, be connected. So your podcast, I feel like, lets people get that connection. Like not everybody can just have a drink with everybody in Charlotte. You got to meet them. You got to get to that level. But with you're just giving us the drink with these guys, so we feel like we're really having a drink with connected Charlotte people.
And that's the premise, and I hope people feel that way, particularly when we think about folk who are running some of those institutions. Again, we've had Tom Gabbard, Ali Sullivan Brown. These folk are running, all the institutions, but have an opportunity really just to listen in and hear that, they're regular folk. I know you work with Tom all the time, and he's a good dude. But people, won't know that unless they run up on him on the street or, inside of a bar. And that particularly probably won't happen right now. So our podcast gives people that same opportunity.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's neat to hear these folks start at the beginning, professional, and then not to say they get unprofessional, but they get, just like you said, they get more open, more loose, and just like anybody does with a comfortable conversation, a comfortable cocktail. But yeah, and I'm learning how to make cocktails based on what they're saying. So thanks for bringing that. Yeah, it's really cool. Check out Crafting with Cradle. And then let's get Tamberly in here. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tamberly Ferguson, the Director of Digital Media and Strategy for WDAV Classical Public Radio. She manages podcast operations. She works to expand the lens of discovery and exploration in classical music and elevate new perspectives in the genre. She produces the Power Play podcast with co-hosts Ross Hickman and Alexander Carbo. Tamberly, welcome. And tell us, how did you start this podcast? Why did you start the podcast? What was the idea behind it? And what is it?
Yeah, Joe, thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody who's out there tuning in. So at WDAV Classical Public Radio, our broadcast signal, plays classical music throughout the day, and we wanted a way to be able to dive deeper into other topics about classical music, and we thought podcasting would be a great way to do that, and maybe engage our current audience, but expand our audience as well, diving into maybe the intersection of different topics. And so, we felt like it would be a great medium to do that. So we launched our most recent project, Power Play, which explores the moments in history where music, power, and politics collide. And it's a scripted narrative podcast. Our co-hosts, they sort of pick a topic and do some research on it and try to figure out, some interesting things about that particular topic to bring to our audience. And they discuss that topic. We play excerpts, usually of some of the music for whomever we're highlighting. And it's been a great way for us to really talk about classical music, but other forms of music as well, and bring out some interesting things. Like one of our episodes is about Lev Theremin, the inventor of the theremin, who had a pretty interesting past. He was a spy, but also invented this instrument that people most know about when they hear sci-fi films. Yeah.
So very cool. I love the history intersection there too. I mean, you can make anything interesting if you dig up enough history on things. And wow, I mean, who would have known that about the inventor of the theremin? And I like that I don't feel as dumb. Like I'm really not smart when it comes to classical music, so I was a little intimidated when I first listened, but you guys are so welcoming and just really kind of open to it, and it really helped me learn a lot, and I wasn't overwhelmed or anything by it. It was really interesting. It makes me want to listen to classical music, which which is great.
Yeah.
So great job with that. And now, are your co-hosts, are they employees of WDAV? Are they already hosts?
No,
Or-
so actually our one of our co-hosts is, who created and sort of pitched us the idea for the podcast is an alum of Davidson College, and our other co-host is a current student at the college, and so that also gave us another way to engage with the college, and the college holds our license, but we sort of operate independently in terms of, we're supported by the community. We're actually in a fundraiser right now. But that gave us an opportunity to connect with the college, also be a resource to students in helping them grow their podcast skills and learning about the production process. Yeah, it's been really great for us. And we all enjoy being able to impart our expertise with students on campus.
Okay, cool. Okay, great. Now let's have this open discussion with everybody. Anybody can chime in if you want to. Lauren Waller wants to hear about your guest generation process. How you select your guests. How do you find great stories? Who wants to start?
I run down the list of actors that I already know. I'm like, all right, who are my friends? I mean, that's where I started because I've been doing this now for 30 years. Wow. And I'm only 19, so do that. So, I mean, I've worked with so many nameless, faceless, unknown, hardworking actors over the years that, I mean, that's what honestly made me start. It was that it's like, oh my gosh, I've got this great pool of talent to just start pulling from. So that's where I went. It was like, I went with the people that I knew personally. It also helps to have that connection and that rapport and that relationship with them to, for ease of conversation, for sure.
Brian, while you're here,
Yes.
question from Stephanie. Would you consider a drive-in performance event to continue your work during COVID?
I'm not sure I follow. But
I think maybe, I'm not sure if she's talking about acting. Maybe she have to clarify, or if she's talking about a live. I mean, you don't do your podcast live, do you?
I haven't yet. I would consider doing it live, if I could coordinate that somehow. But as far as going to the drive-in, I mean, yeah, I hear that they're actually, the drive-in movie theaters are hosting stand-up comedy now, as well as movies and things like that. So, yeah, support the local drive-ins, man. Do it. I'm sure they need your business.
Dr. Keith, what about how do you generate your guests? How do you figure out who to have on next?
So like Brian, this is our third year. So like Brian, we start out with, who did I know? Who was going to be the easiest person I could get on without saying no, that wouldn't say no to me, to get this thing going. And then from there, it just kind of took off on its own. We're very intentional. We do, we do 10 shows a year. So we're once a month with a 2-month break. So I had to really come up with a list. So we started off with a list of people we wanted to be on each season. And then from there, getting those people on. But if someone couldn't do it, then we had substitutes for that list. And so now, I hate to say it, that, now people are asking us to be on, and it's kind of tough. So I let Jamaica kind of, be the bad cop on that one. People don't call me anymore if you want to be on. Call Jamaica, and that way I don't have to say no to people that I generally love and enjoy. But our community of art, is so huge now that it's tough to whittle a list down to 10 people a year to put on. But I think it works well for us. But the live episodes gave us an opportunity to slot more people in, because those were shorter shows, and of course they were live. So the regular podcast, again, we'll stick with the 10, but the live shows we can kind of just put people on at will.
Yeah, that's a good problem to have, isn't it? That you have too much art in Charlotte to get on the stage. That's great. I mean, and I love that you're letting people know about all this stuff that's in the community. I think we talked about before we started this session today that there's so many people that don't even know there's local podcasts in Charlotte. So, and local art, we find that all the time. Another question for you, Dr. Keith, from Stephanie. What was the most delicious post-cocktail convo on your podcast that you've ever recorded? So I think she's getting at what was the most, juicy bits after people had a drink that you got into.
Well, at the sake of saving my own relationships with people, it is, but not today. I'm gonna take a pass on that.
You'll have to listen to
Smart
all
man.
of it for yourself. So, yeah. Let's see. Oh boy, there's so many things here. Well, Tamberly, what about you as far as getting your? I mean, do you have different guests, or is it just different topics each time?
No, so it's just our co-hosts, and it's different topics each time, and it's really whatever they're interested in and most engaged in. Both of our hosts are avid readers, and so they sort of look for things that they find interesting. With one of our co-hosts still being a student, sometimes some of the coursework that they're doing, they're able to, bring in. Our episode on Nina Simone really honed in on that and gave them an opportunity to be able to dive into some of the things that they were talking about in class, and bring it into the podcast, as well as talk about some current events that have been going on in the nation today. So yeah, that's how we do.
That's good. And do you feel like you have a lot? I mean, because arts, there's so much. Do you feel like you guys have a lot of plans in the future? I mean, no shortage of finding material, right?
Right. There's so many artists that are not known and who don't necessarily get the spotlight. You kind of hear about the popular composers and artists of the day, and this gives us an opportunity to be able to get into some of those lesser known folks or lesser known topics that we just found interesting, and hope our audience finds interesting too.
Yeah, you got to keep them engaged for sure.
Right.
Jay, what about you? How do you decide which brewery or tap house or whatever to highlight?
Well, so when we first started, we got done with the first episode, walked out to the parking lot, and we said, when are we going to record again? And we had 6 or 7 ideas right away. Now, obviously, as time has gone on, those same breweries, we started in 2013, right in the boom. So there was a new brewery opening up, every other week, it seemed like. So we always had somebody to talk to. And then, after a while, people started reaching out to us saying, hey, we want to come on the show. And it was more of like a promotional thing, which is, totally fine. So people would kind of reach out to us. During COVID, it slowed down a little bit. So we kind of have to reach out to people now and, tell them, hey, we either want you back on the show or we want you on, originally. My next 2, I've got Fauna Flora was going to be on the next one, Todd Boera. We'll talk with him over there at Optimus Hall. And then Heady Thieves, a new brewery just opened up over there by Camp North End. So we'll have those guys on too. But there's enough bottle shops opening and enough breweries opening that we could pretty much always have somebody to talk to. We've never been at a shortage of people in the craft beer industry to talk to, that's for sure.
Yeah. One more question from Stephanie I better just shout her out because she's asking all the questions from the Audio Oasis Storytelling Podcast. Got to give her podcast out there. So she's great at questions. Thanks, Stephanie. She asked you 10 years from now, hopefully post-COVID, where do you see the future of craft beer?
I saw that question. I was trying to type back to her. I don't see it going anywhere. It's only growing. Some breweries are going to be closing down just because they can't keep up with what the other breweries are doing. We've already seen that. A couple breweries here in Charlotte have closed down and across the state. So I don't see it going anywhere. Macro beer is still going to be out there, but slowly but surely, the craft beer industry is chipping away at their stranglehold on the market. I think we're at 8 or 9% right now of total beer sales nationwide. So that's gone up, almost a percentage each year. So we're not going to take over, the big guys anytime soon, but we're slowly chipping away at it.
Okay. Boy, these questions are coming in fast and furious here. So I'm glad we got to the Q&A sooner because there's a lot of them here. Tamberly. What are your thoughts on using your classical music podcast to help young students learn about real instruments in classical music?
That's a interesting idea. I think right now we've just been, focused on telling some of the stories of different people and figures in history or throughout history. So we really haven't, thought about using that or using the podcast as a way to engage or teach about music in that way, but it's definitely something for us to consider. We just have been trying to do more podcasts and creating different types. So that's something to consider.
Okay. Now there was a question from Alyssa, and I can't seem to find it again. Alyssa, the intersectional discussion. Alyssa, can you unmute yourself and ask that question?
Sure. So I had two questions here.
Yes.
The first was about, let's see if I can find it. When discussing broad arts topics, how do you balance subject matter experts with hobbyists on your guest list? And the follow-up question to that was, if I can find it again, it's something, who drives intersectional discussion? Is that the guests or is that the hosts on your part?
Brian, you look like you want to.
Is that for any? Is that for anybody?
That's for everybody.
That's for
right?
anybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Who drives the discussion? I usually do. I mean, because I've brought in that one person to, share their story. So, I mean, there's certainly, I always do a little bit of research on them as best I can. Again, for a lot of these people, there's not a lot to dig up. So I try to pull out as much as I can to get into, some of the fun stuff in their story. And I'm sorry, listen, what was the first part of the question then? I missed the first part.
The first part was, how do you balance subject matter experts with hobbyists in your guest list, if at all?
Well, I mean, that's a little bit different for me because I would say for all intents and purposes, the ones that they are pursuing it professionally on a professional level. So whether you consider that expert or hobbyist, I mean, even with actors or people in the entertainment business where we're all independent contractors and we don't know from one day to the next or 1 week to the next if we're going to have a job, that's just your perspective of it and how you look at it. But I always treat them and approach them as if they are a full-time working professional and they're trying to make this their main gig as far as their support system. So
I guess I can answer the hobbyist part. I mean, the beer industry, you obviously have people that are working in the industry and they're, getting paid for it. And then you have people that it's just a hobby. They like to go out and drink and they check into their beers on Untapped. We've always had a rule, even with the people in the industry, with no sales reps are on the show. We like to have either the owners or the head brewers or something like that on the show, because the salespeople, you get the pitch, and we don't want the pitch. We want the story behind the brewery, that kind of thing. And then so for like a hobbyist, if it's just somebody that is their hobby is drinking beer, there's no story there. There's nothing that anybody else really wants to listen to. So we want people to have a story behind it. So somebody that is actually getting paid and is in the industry, and they make their living from it. That's who we want to talk to.
Okay. Dr. Keith?
So I think for the first part of the question, I think myself and our guests, we drive, that conversation. And so whatever comes out of it, I'm willing to pivot based off the questions I've probably already had to make sure whatever conversation is coming out, that is very organic. And it's also, it speaks to whatever the guest wants to speak towards. And so when we think about, you said, I guess, hobbyists and subject matter experts, I believe that everyone that comes on our show is a subject matter expert. One, that they're doing art professionally, they work in the art space. And so I think that's kind of where that is.
Oh, is everybody else losing Keith?
Yep.
yeah.
I've never seen that happen.
Yeah.
I've never seen it like a TV station go away.
That's
So hopefully
It's like a
Keith will come-
disaster movie.
Oh, we lost him. Hopefully Keith comes back. I know. I was like, what's happening in Charlotte? Does anybody want to speak about? I think part of her question that got
There
lost
he
was.
is.
Oh,
Yeah,
he's
I think
back.
that's the county. Listen, that's Mecklenburg County. That's not me.
Keith, okay. Oh, sorry. We kind of lost you, but I wanted to one thing we lost at part of her question was inclusivity in guests and keeping that in mind. And do you have anything to say about that and how difficult or easy that is, or if that's just something you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think for me, it everybody we put on, there's an intentionality behind that, and we want to be very inclusive. Again, even just being, an African American doing a podcast, my voice is representation. I want to be representative of all, of folk, in our community, and make sure that again, if you are a minority and haven't engaged in the arts in our community, that this is a gateway for doing that. And so, we want to make sure everyone feels welcome, but at the same time that we're not going to skip over, broad-based topics, particularly when we talk about, art as activism, art and social justice, particularly as things were happening in our own community with Keith Lamont Scott and a few other things. I made sure that the show spoke to that, and guests that were on had the freedom to talk about that, particularly if it was interwoven in their art or their presentation or the exhibition. So, we don't shy away from any of that. And I believe that anyone that comes on the show has to recognize that, this is a place for you to be open, transparent, and honest. And yeah, we're going to drink, we're going to talk about art, but, there is a platform here that builds our community through art and through cultural engagement.
Okay. Cool.
I think Joe, real quick to go back to her other question was kind of who drives the show.
Yeah.
Do you let the guests, do all the talking, or do you do all the talking? As the host of the podcast, you need to drive the show. Asking them a question, and if they go on for 4 minutes, sometimes that's great because they're filling a lot of time and that's all you get. But if you only have 20 minutes with somebody, you kind of have to cut them off. And I've done it before where it's like, hey, like, this is a great answer, but like, we need to move on. So yeah, as the host of the show, you have to drive it. I have two co-hosts on my show, but I'm the lead host. So I start the interview, I ask the first question, then I'll usually ask a follow-up, and then I've got my two co-hosts that before COVID, and we could all do it in the same room, I could just look at them and they would get the idea, okay, I'm up next for the question. But you definitely need to drive the conversation with your host, or with your guest rather.
Jay,
because otherwise,
do you do like a pre-screen with them and ask them if there's any topics they want you to cover?
Sometimes, yeah. Most of the time when they're coming on, we already know what they're coming on for. It's either their brewery they want to promote or the new beer or whatever. So yeah, a little bit of that. But they always ask, hey, what are you going to ask me? And I say, I'm going to ask you what your name is, and then after that, we just kind of freewheel it. We don't have questions already written out. As they're talking, as my co-host will ask them a question, I'll jot down a little note of something else that I want to ask. And it's more of just a conversation where we're just sitting around a table having a beer, and we're just, asking them, not random questions, but questions that aren't pre-prepared or anything like that. We don't want pre-made answers or anything like that. So it's definitely something you have to drive the conversation and not let them, go off on their own tangent or anything like that.
How many beers do you have before you start recording?
At least one. There's only been 1 or 2 episodes where we haven't had a beer before we start, just because we were in a hurry, and I'm drinking my first beer as we're doing it. But the interview segment is always a second segment. So we have one segment before where it's just the three of us talking, and that's when we're usually having our first beer. Okay. But yeah, they're not very fun when you don't have a beer first when you're talking about beer. Not a very good show.
What is fun if you haven't done that first?
Yeah.
Question for everybody. This is from Eric Judson, and I was going to kind of get into this, but Eric kind of gives us a great segue. Is what have you seen your podcast downloads? Have you seen your downloads increase or decrease since the pandemic? And also, like, what else? How has the pandemic affected your podcast recording times, producing times? Is it difficult? Is it easier? So, what do you see the listens, and what do you see the production?
Anybody want to take that first, or I'll go?
You're here, so yeah.
I don't check my the actual downloads. That's my partner's thing. He'll send us an update every once in a while. We haven't really checked it during COVID. But as far as production times and things like that, when we were all doing purely Zoom calls, for me the production time isn't any less or any more. It's about the same. It's Like I said, we don't edit our podcast. I hit record and we go. So it was actually less time because I could just set up all my equipment. I just had it set up and it wasn't that big of a deal. The only thing that changed for me during COVID was I didn't get to see my buddies and do the podcast in person. We just did it over Zoom calls and we all sat at our kitchen tables. That was the only difference for us.
Tamberly, what about you?
Yeah, so we were in the process of launching our podcast. So we had recorded at least a couple of episodes in studio before COVID hit, and then it hit, and we had to kind of reshuffle things and figure out how to record from home. And both of our co-hosts were in the process of moving off campus and one moving back home. So we had to kind of work our schedule around that, which was interesting, but we were able to, take it on and reconfigure things, get folks great mics and figure out the best corner of their house to record in. And, because we do sort of a scripted narrative type podcast, some of the stuff we could do in post in the editing process. Yeah.
Okay. Keith, are you still here?
Yeah, I think so.
What about you? I didn't we're at the top of my, there you
go. The question is about the numbers, right? Checking the numbers.
Yeah, like have your downloads increased, decreased, and have you found it more difficult to record and produce during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I never check the numbers. I really don't. Honestly, I don't give a fuck. I think for me, it's I was taught you do the show for 1 or 1,000. You do the same show no matter how many people are listening. So I don't worry so much about the numbers. Our production value, it didn't really change per se. Of course, we were doing it again in-house. Chuck had all the equipment. I think Chuck's going to be on one of these panels soon. And so Chuck has all the equipment. We also do a video portion as well. So we tape it. So we have a video broadcast as well as the audio. We actually crunch the video down because I don't think people want to watch me for 60 minutes. So we said, hey, listen, what's 15 or 20 minutes with the video portion. And then when COVID hit, of course, we just did everything via Zoom. Chuck was able to match up, what we needed the same way we're doing this. We recorded it, and then you put it on the link for the video portion of it, and then with the audio, he just transferred that same audio for iTunes and all the other platforms. So it hadn't affected us much. It's just the fact you just don't get to see people in person as you're doing the actual taping.
Yeah, Keith, while you're here, we had a question from Lori about visual components to your podcast, and everybody else can speak up, but I think you're the only one who does that. But what platform do you use for the video portion?
So Chuck's got his own network. So
Who's Chuck?
So Chuck Holliday, and he's on one of these. I know Joni's back there doing the whole.
Joni will put it out.
Yeah, so Joni will put that up there. But he's on one of the panels to talk about production value. And so Chuck's got his own network, sweet929.tv. So if you go to my website, qcradle.com, you can get those links and watch the show as well. So that's what we saw. We wanted to own our content. We wanted to make sure that everything that we had. That was in our hands, and we could do it the way we wanted to do it, put it out the way we wanted to put it out, when we want to put it out. So, I think there's an ease of comfort in all that. And again, whether people like listening or watching, we wanted to give, folks the opportunity to choose and have an option for both.
Yeah, check out in the chat, Joni posted that Chuck will be on the Video Podcasting 101 session next week. Check that out. It's free. Yeah, thanks. Keith, that's great. Yeah, we always got to shout out Chuck or whoever, anybody like that. That's great. And who did I miss? Brian? Brian, did you weigh in on the pandemic question?
I did not.
He's quitting.
I did not.
And Brian, congratulations! Congratulations, you're not the first person to drop an F-bomb.
I know. Way to go, Keith! You steal my thunder, man. Like the others, for the most part, I don't really watch the numbers that closely. I did check once or twice during the pandemic just to see. I was like, wow, is it making a difference? And the numbers did go down a little bit, but not too much. I also haven't been putting out as much content because the pandemic and everything that went along with it during this time actually hit me hit me pretty hard, just personally. So I don't know. I apologize if this, kind of makes people kind of go, "What? You're an idiot." But I felt like it was a little irresponsible of me to continue to just talk to actors about their acting career, especially at that time when nobody was doing anything. It didn't seem as valuable trying to find out, hey, how many episodes of The Walking Dead were you in, as opposed to truly what was going on in the world. So I felt a huge responsibility to kind of shift it a little bit and start talking to people about how are you dealing during the pandemic? We're all artists, we're all performers, we're all independent contractors. Are you surviving? Are you going to lose your house? Are you going to be able to feed your kids? And then when George Floyd happened and everything associated with that, I felt an even greater responsibility to talk about that. And I wanted to do it. I love all of you guys who are doing this via Zoom and virtually, because that's truly the best way to do it right now. But I really wanted to connect with the people more because I felt that we needed that. And it took a little while for me, one, to coordinate guests and to be able to find a way to do it safely in person. So my content production has not been as high because I've been trying to figure out how to do this, in person under these circumstances. So.
Oh yeah, my wife and I were the same way. We were just like, the world is falling apart. How can we just sit and talk about murder? Like, it's what is happening, So
Right.
yeah, I get that for sure.
Right.
That doesn't make you crazy. It makes you a human, like everyone. And I think that's what it goes back to what Andy Go talked about last night, just about how podcasting is such a human thing. It's humans telling stories. It's such it's that really spoke to me. And I think that's what it is. It's we're all human here, and we're sharing our art and our culture and the things we love and or the things we don't love. And so it's really such a cool thing. Tamberly, got a question for you from Marcus. Which part of the scripted show is most challenging, the writing and planning or the production?
Oh, wow. I I think that depends on which co-host you ask. Thanks for the question, Marcus. I would say it's probably a little bit of both. Again, going back to one of our co-hosts does the editing for the podcast. So when it comes, when we were producing our first season, he had the added task of, doing the hosting part and piecing everything together. And, we tried to coordinate as best as possible to, make sure that he had all the notes he needed to put the podcast together to make it easier so that we could turn things around more quickly and push things out. But I think that's a challenge. And then on the other side of it, of just researching the topics that we cover, that can take some time, and just making sure that you're, really looking into the topic and talking about things in an accurate way, and then finding any supplemental music that may help support the topic that you're covering. That can be a challenge too. So again, I think it depends on who you ask.
Yeah. Yeah, they're gonna get mad at you for not
right.
I think my next question, and I know it's weird to start with you, Tamara, because we kind of talked about this, but being somebody that's in the live arts, I mean, this podcast festival originally was going to be a live event. It was going to be, we had Jad Abramrod on board, was going to be a keynote speaker, was going to be at Spirit Square in Charlotte. I work for Blumenthal Performing Arts, so we've been hit hard with, shutting down since March. So I wanted to ask everybody, what's the biggest thing you missed with the arts being shut down, or do you miss? And I know, Tamberly, you kind of said before, you didn't have any ticket, like you're glad to stay home, but was there anything canceled that you were going to go see, or was there a museum that you were upset about closing?
Well, I will say WDAV hosted some live events down in NODA at, I'm forgetting the name of the brewery, but we would host those live events, and we had to convert that from a live event to a virtual event, but I miss seeing those fans. It was a space where you saw all different types of people and enjoying classical music, and you have everybody walking in with their families and dogs, and while listening to classical music. So I miss those events, that was kind of hard for us to have to pivot to virtual rather than in person.
Yeah. Okay. What about you, Keith? Dr. Keith, what did you have tickets to anything that got canceled that you were upset about?
Oh yeah, it was also going to be gala season here in Charlotte too. So a lot of the institutions were gearing up for fundraising and galas. Who doesn't love to wear a good tuxedo, man? And all that shit went out the window. It's been sweatpants, I think, and t-shirts for everybody for the last.
Yeah.
But I think we missed again the interaction. Literally, seeing some of our favorite artists in person. The Beckler had just hired our newest curator, and she had a great exhibition ready to go, of course, but that had to get tabled because the museums were closed. So I think just being out and about to all these spaces that we normally traditionally were going to go to, throughout the year, and to not be able to do that, to not be able to introduce new folk to our community. People were moving to Charlotte. Our spaces were places that people normally would frequent and get a good idea or an ideation of what Charlotte is. And so with those places closed, it made it a lot tougher. I think, in particular for us, who have been here, who had routines, or you're a part of those things, and they were shuttered. So yeah, we miss it all, man. And just, as things are starting to slowly reopen, I think they're giving people, some more to do. And it gives us an opportunity to really, again, to get back out there, really engage, and see people, and have that, that human to human, that person to person contact.
That's right. Yeah, I just keep hearing people say, as soon as this is over, I'm doing this. I'm going to do this. I just have these visions. I'm going to go to everything. Like, I'm regretting all the things I didn't go to. Like, why didn't I go to that? I didn't know there was going to be a pandemic. Brian, what about you? Did you miss anything big? What tickets did you have? What were you going to do?
I didn't have tickets for anything, but the biggest loss for me right now is any form of live theater or live entertainment. I was really, really fortunate that I had just finished a production of The Odd Couple here in Charlotte. Like, I think that was truly the last piece of live theater that was done before the pandemic hit. So any of the local theaters all of a sudden are dark and have no idea when they're going to reopen. They've been working hard to try and compensate doing parking lot shows. And again, I know someone asked about the drive-in, and that's another viable option. I don't know if it fills the same void in the same way. Some of the guests that I've had that are friends of mine who are stand-up comedians are talking about, comedy clubs not being able to stay open or not knowing where the future of that is going to stand and how they're going to get through. And so that's the biggest thing that I miss. And that's one of the greatest concerns for me. Again, it's just how it's going to affect people in the arts personally and professionally, for sure.
Now, okay, Jay, I know you had tickets. Jay, tell us what you missed. I know you had tickets.
I had tickets to Alabama. They were going to play with Charlie Daniels Band. So I had tickets to that. I had tickets to Billy Joel, which all of these have been postponed, so they're not,
they might
cancel
still
or anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, Billy Joel was a big one. I had tickets to that. That was also my birthday weekend. I turned 40 this year, so I had big plans for the weekend and everything. All that went by the wayside. All the beer festivals. We go and record at these festivals, and we get a lot of interviews, or we get a lot of content from these festivals. So all of those have been canceled, or postponed. Most of them have just been canceled at this point. They'll just come back next year, hopefully. I guess we missed a lot of content because these festivals, breweries will come in from out of town, so it gives us the opportunity to record with like 6 different breweries on one day, and gives us a couple different weeks of shows. So yeah, that's the Billy Joel was the big one. That was pretty much a bummer.
Yeah. So what did you do for your 40th birthday then?
Nothing. I had a big. I was going to roast a pig. My buddy is a chef at Midwood, so we were going to smoke a pig here at my house and have a big party and everything. And that went away. Actually, I'm doing a 40.5 birthday here in a couple weeks. So
okay.
I just
idea.
rescheduled it.
I was going to say, did you stay home and watch Brian on Netflix?
No. Just I don't know what I did. Oh, me and my girlfriend just had a steak dinner from Del Frisco's and ate it at the house. That was it.
Okay. Well, that's something. Okay, one more question before we got 2 minutes left. This is for anyone. Prior to COVID, where were you doing interviews, and what was your recording setup like? Was it in a studio, at home, in person, etc.? Well, we know you were at the breweries.
I've had a few. So when I was in radio, I had a professional radio studio to do it in, and then we bought mobile equipment. So now I'm talking about now. It's a Mackie Pro FX 12 soundboard. I use that, and then we have these headsets that we use. We've had a couple different setups, but this is the most recent, and it's pretty nice for what we need it for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and we were recording a couple of episodes, like I said, recording a couple of episodes in our studios on the campus of Davidson College, which is where our station is. We had to shift that to recording from home.
Yeah. Are you doing it via Zoom, Tamberly?
Yeah. So we've got a whole setup. Both hosts have microphones, and then we try to look at each other, and I kind of sit in the background on mute.
yeah.
Chime in when I need to.
And so now they're each recording their own version and send you the recordings, and then you put them together. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's a lot more work here. But what about you, Brian? Did you have an in-home studio, or where do you record?
Yeah, I was actually recording right here in this room. And what you can't see right next to me, I have this big, giant Doctor Who-looking time machine, which is actually my voiceover recording booth for all my home voiceover work that I do for commercials and stuff like that. But I would set up, just a little card table right here in front of the love seat, and we would sit directly across from each other. So it was very personal and intimate. And then I would do, Skype and FaceTime for people who were out of town actors. But then after the pandemic, I was like, okay, how am I going to do this? And I was actually able to move it downstairs in the house. I've got this very big, spacious living room / sunroom, and we're 10, 12 feet apart now. And it actually works really well. So I'm fortunate that I was able to move the setup that way and still have it work.
Yeah. What about you, Dr. Keith? Where do you record usually?
So yeah, we started off at my house, and we continue to do it. We wanted that feel of being intimate in the space, so these conversations would be driven, at my dining room table. And Chuck, he's got all the equipment, the lights, the cameras, the setup, and so we just made sure that the lighting was great. But then, of course, when COVID hit, I went ahead and jumped on Amazon. I think like a million other people, and bought a full lighting rig. I think I got the last one, and so now so I was able to do the lighting myself. Things I had to learn on my own, stuff I don't do. I'm talent, I don't have to, I don't do setups and all that stuff. But then I had to learn how to put up the lights, and then, again, with the Zoom, Chuck was able to go ahead and do the content that way. So we're still doing it in my house. I think we'll want to continue to do that, but we're going to wait for a safe time and when people feel comfortable enough to come back. Until then, we'll continue to do it over Zoom.
That's great. Guys, this has been so great. Thank you all. Thank you, Tamberly, Brian, Dr. Keith, Jay. You guys were awesome. You guys, this was effortless. I could sit here for another hour just to ask you questions myself without even reading the chat ones. But this has been great. Thank you guys for doing this. Thanks for your time. Reminder to everybody, there will be a survey sent out. Please fill that out. It really helps us figure out what's good, what's not good, what we can improve on. Also, this is being recorded, and you can get this recording. It will be emailed to you, a link to it, sometime by the end of the month. It takes us time to kind of make sure it all sounds good and cut out Keith's F-bombs. Just kidding. We will amplify those. We won't cut those out. That's great. So, no, actually, thank you guys again so much. Brian Lafontaine, Tamberly Ferguson, Jay Brown, and Dr. Keith Cradle. You guys are awesome. Check out charlottepodcastfestival.com for any other sessions. Thank you, guys. Thank you, listeners. Thanks, Stephanie, who's cracking me up in the chat. Got to read these chats. That'll be available in the recorded session as well. Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day. Good night.